If I can have y'all's attention, please. Since we got started 15 minutes late last week, we're going to start 3 minutes early this week to try to make up time. Dominic, would you mind saying a prayer for this crowd, please, sir?
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, we love you. We thank you for this day, God. We thank you for the precious gift of life and all that comes with it and what you provide. God, the question is, what do we do with this life that you've given us? God, help us to use it to glorify you in all that we do, the decisions we make, and this time together as we discuss things that'd be better for this state, this nation, and for your glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate everybody getting here early enough to be here and count a quorum, and we have one. So we have 3 bills this morning, and I'm going to start out with HB 144. Chairman Earhart. Here. Be fine.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come for you and lay out House Bill 144. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to visit your committee, agriculture being a major Cobb County industry. Don't go there with Chairman England. That's just not appropriate. Mr. Chairman, I have a serious proposition. I knew better to do. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee. House Bill 144 is a proposition. It's a very consumer-friendly pet proposition. It's something that's been needed for a long time. I do want to say that I've got several people that are here, most particularly Mr. Sean Davis and Mr. Fred Bentley, who are experts in this arena that I've worked with. Many of you who are co-sponsors on this bill. I want to say this is a bipartisan bill. Representative Henson is a part of this as well, and she has a long history in animal rights and in the industry of pet sales, pets themselves, hunting dogs, everything. We've all in Georgia seen a lot of dog bills over the years, and this particular legislation has consumer and animal protections, includes additional vaccinations. I draw your attention to those boards, and also to, I think you should have a handout here, what House Bill 144 really does. It's the only vaccine a retail pet store must give is a rabies shot. Currently, with 144, animals being sold by retail stores will be vaccinated against as many as 9 diseases. The retail pet stores can purchase dogs and cats from problem breeders with multiple violations. Currently, 144 says only qualified breeders free of certain violations. 144 does not give consumers even a 1-day return policy. We're setting up a 10-day return policy for consumers, and you can read these. I don't need to walk through them specifically. Let me just address a couple issues that have come to my attention, and what we're talking about. We're not talking about getting into 700 plus breeders or individual sales between people in your communities and that kind of thing. If we ever tried to get that deep into something like this, we'd never get there in this state, and it's not something we need to talk about. But what we can talk about is the consistency of a business environment and larger retail businesses that have come to us and asked them to make sure that they have the right to continue to do their business. And we're talking about 30 retail-sized stores. We're not talking about folks who trade hunting dogs or that kind of thing. Most of that's covered under the USDA. As a matter of fact, they preempt most of that regulatory environment. So this is not precluding local governments from getting involved in that kind of thing. It just says, though, but that if you are thinking about regulating, that this particular set of regulatory guidelines with all of its consumer protections are a basic standard that you have to have in the state of Georgia. So I don't see it as a preemption of local control about that. We do have a role as a state to set up a consistent business environment and a regulatory environment across the board. So that's what we're trying to get at. I'm trying to be specific with that. I don't want to get into individual sales or anything like that. So what I'm asking for is for this committee to favorably report House Bill 144, which is a consumer-friendly, it's a pet-friendly, it's not a major preemption for local governments. It's a good piece of legislation, and I ask you to support it. Mr. Chairman, I'm certainly available for questions, and I also have some people I may defer to if the questions get beyond my capacity.
Does any member have a question for the author, Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do have a question specifically around the local control piece. I've received some email that was questioning the local control piece around regulating the source. There were some folks that were concerned about potential puppy mills being used as the source for the dogs. And as I read the local control section here, on the last page is lines 244 through 248, that places restrictions on local government from passing ordinances about the actual sale in the store. But as far as sourcing, a local government could still place restrictions on the source. Is that right, as I read it?
This bill, yes, sir. This bill places restrictions on the retail sale. Lines 246 and 247, transfer a dog or cat from a retail pet store holding a valid license issued by the department or imposes restrictions on such sale or delivery.
So just to repeat and make it clear, if a local government wanted to pass an ordinance on a retail pet store saying that they couldn't buy from a puppy mill, however that was defined by federal law or wherever, they could do that.
If they could make sure that it complied with USDA preemptions or anything like that, yes, they could. I mean,
Thank you.
I did one thing I forgot to mention, that those who are in support of this bill, we've got a significant amount of that. We have the Georgia Veterinary Medical Society that's in support of this bill, the Georgia Canine Coalition, the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, and the American Kennel Club are all signed off on this particular piece of legislation.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Earhart, this is a question from a friend, although I've been told none of my questions sound friendly, so.
You and I have several pieces of legislation to work on together. Quick, so I find you friendly.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned consistency in the retail environment, and as that being part of the argument in favor of there being a compelling state interest to preempt local control in this structure, I wonder if you could address line 61 of the bill, or one of your witnesses might address line 61 of the bill, which seems to exempt natural persons and exempt individuals from this structure, so that this consistent scheme applies only to corporations in the definition of what is a retail pet store owner.
I would agree, and I'll defer, but as I said, with respect to this, what we're trying to get to with this particular piece of legislation is only the retail side of the equation, not the individual sales or a natural person. Can't, just because you sell, a few dogs to your neighbor, or if you're a small breeder that follows the current statutory environment, you're meeting all of those requirements. We're not getting into that. That's over 700 plus. We're crafting this piece of legislation just to get to these major retail operations. No, those are the ones who've actually come to us and said, please give us a consistent environment. We haven't actually heard from the 700 other plus.
But this would exempt your sole proprietor in Winder. Is that correct? Even though they might otherwise meet all the criteria?
Let me read through that again.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
trying to see what you're getting to, Representative Quick, on that. A retail pet store, pet dealer.
I'm frequently accused of being down in the weeds, Mr.
That's
Chairman.
all right. I have no problem with with weeds. I just want to make sure I answer your question correctly.
Read the bottom of your agenda and you'll see that.
All right, I'm going to defer to somebody who can answer that question
Yes,
better than
sir.
me, if
Thank
you don't mind. I don't have the specific answer, Mr. Chairman, if it's all right with you. Introduce
Good morning,
yourself.
Sean Davis with the Pet Industry Joint Advisory Council, and as Chairman Earhart mentioned, the sole focus of this was the brick and mortar storefront operations, and those of course are going to be corporations. We know of about the Department of Agriculture thought that might be as high as 30. Our review suggests it might be 20 or so, but these are all going to be businesses in a commercial environment. They're going to be set up in an LLC at the least. If you're an individual operating it, they would be captured here. Any type of commercial storefront. The reason we put natural persons in, working with Chairman Earhart and Jeremy Airy, who's been fantastic work with the legal counsel, was because we had requests from those 700 plus that are your kennels and small businesses, small individuals who work out of their kennels and breeding facilities and that sort of thing, to be sure that this does not apply to those 700 plus who are just individuals who aren't operating storefronts. And so we tried to make the definition as comprehensive as we could to include retailers, but to be clear that it does not include individuals.
So if you're an LLC.
It would apply. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that sufficient for your? Okay.
I believe the answer is yes. It does not apply even
It
if-
does not apply. No, I'm sorry. I
It
didn't
does-
get.
Yeah, right. It does not apply to individuals, even those that might have a storefront, as long as they operate as a sole proprietorship.
My understanding, I'm not legal counsel, my understanding is that if you operate a commercial business, then you are going to be captured by the bill. Generally speaking, individual, because of liability reasons, is going to be under some type of LLC or something, and they're going to be captured under the bill. What we're not trying to go after is the non-commercial type facilities, which are 700 plus in this state, who simply have a kennel or sell out of their homes or what have you. So it's only the commercial retailers. If we tried to address the 700 plus, which is American Kennel Club and the Georgia Canine Coalition and those types, we really would have a hard time. What we're trying to do is get the easy hanging fruit, who are also the high volume dealers. And the other reason we're focused on them is that, as Chairman Earhart wrote in a press release, you expect as a consumer, when you pull up to a storefront on a curb, you expect higher standards there. You expect return policies. You expect certain standards and vaccination requirements and disclosures and so forth. When I bought my dog out of South Carolina, it's the South Carolina state dog. I feel like I cheated Georgia a little bit, but the Boykin Spaniel, same thing. I found the right breeder. I looked them up, looked up their background and whether or not there's any major consumer complaints. Looked at their contract, and that was a one-on-one individual sale. We're not trying to affect that whatsoever. We're talking about commercial brick and mortar storefront operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to follow up with that because I hadn't caught that Representative Quick's question, and I'm not familiar enough with the way that dogs are bought and sold from a breeder. I adopted mine from the Paulding County Animal Shelter. If a breeder who specializes in Yorkshire Terriers, as an example, has an LLC, they would be caught up under these regulations. And I guess the further question is if there's somebody here that can add some insight, if there's a breeder maybe in our audience that can talk about what some of the standards they operate under. Does a breeder who breeds dogs in their own home, do they generally have an LLC for corporate and other business purposes, or are they just doing it under their own brand, under their own?
They're regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. They have a set of certain standards that
So if I were breeding Yorkshire Terriers, pure breed, and I opened up under an LLC to have a couple of litters of puppies every year or so, under that LLC, I would be under the restrictions in this bill.
I'm not sure where we're going with it, but that we're kind of splitting a little bit of a hair with respect to what is the definition of a retail penalty. Is retail meaning that you have an LLC, have a business license, or does it, for the purposes of this bill, sale and resale to the public? of dogs in general as a retail operation. I'm willing to explore the definition of retail with respect to what is an LLC, what is a breeder with respect to the USDA. I don't have the specific answer to how that definitionally goes right now, but I'm going to have to I'll get that for you.
Okay.
But
And maybe
I mean, the intent is not to create a burden on the 700 plus, but to make this specific to major retail operations. Look at line 59. Retail pet store owner means a pet dealer that operates a commercial establishment engaging in a for-profit business of selling at retail rates dogs or cats to be kept as household pets, provided, however, then that natural persons are not. So I think definitionally it draws a line between a
once you incorporate things.
business license, if you offer for sale to the public, if you advertise, if you do those types of things.
Breeders today go through that process? Are breeders creating LLCs? Are they filing for business licenses?
It's my understanding. Some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, if you want to be a retail store, then you'd have to have a business license. You'd have to have a certain standard of business ethics to be able to do that. I can get further into that. Well,
Does anybody else have any questions? Would y'all let me make an observation? If you look on section 3, it's putting all kind of restrictions on where a retail pet store can get the animals that they sell. And they have to be from licensed people either in the state or out of the state. If you look on line 129 through 194, that pretty much sets up a lemon law for pets that are bought from a retail establishment. And it puts the, what do you call it, owners or whatever, the retail establishment has to reimburse somebody or pay the veterinary expenses or whatever for something that was not necessarily caused by the consumer. If the dog got run over, then that's not the retail store's fault. But if they sell a dog that comes down with one of the diseases that they should have been vaccinated for, then the pet store has to reimburse or give them another dog or either pay the veterinary expenses that are not emergency. I mean, that are emergency type veterinary expenses, right?
that's correct.
And then also, if you look on 225 and 226, it says that if a retail pet store owner has a suspicion that an animal is sick, that it has to be quarantined immediately away from the other population. So I think the bill really puts the pressure on the retail store. And they agreed to this, right? I mean,
They
this is
came to
not
us.
something, I don't think this bill is something that Chairman Earhart thought up last night. This has been something that's been worked on by the list of people that he just said, from veterinarians to Canine Coalition to AKC.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. There is a huge coalition of people that have worked a long time and very hard on this, who are very much in agreement with us. There are those who have a difference of opinion, but most of it goes to those who want to get all the way into all 700 plus, and they want to get into the individual sales and that kind of thing. And we're creating a significant amount of consumer protection. We're creating a standardized business environment across the state for a very narrow definition. Those who are under that natural person definition may be swept up in this, don't seem to have any feeling that they would be, because they're all, and their organizations are all on board with this. If that's the concern, those individuals could have to fall under this regulatory scheme, then I would think I would have heard from those individuals. But what we're not getting into, and what I would never come to this committee and ask, is if we were going to regulate all 700 or every breeder, every hunting dog, everything else in the state, we'd be here for the next 6 weeks and nobody would agree, and then we'd never get any of these consumer protections. So there is a balance there.
Did you have anybody else you wanted to talk that would?
No, sir.
Okay.
Unless you want to ask questions of any of the people that are here. They're available. The veterinary medical people are here for questions from the committee, as are the Canine Coalition and all the others. I'm not sure if any of those signed up, but Mr. Chairman, I'm finished if you're finished with me.
Winfred's got a question.
Mr. Chairman, I think the question is, do those 700 breeders, those people fall up under the same law?
No, sir.
They don't.
They do not.
Well, at the proper time, Mr. Chairman?
And we're not talking about a guy that's breeding German short-haired pointers and
No, sir.
selling them to,
We used to do that.
to-
Yeah, probably. I think that's what our biggest concern is, that we don't want to put an undue hardship on a small person, small breeder trying to, you breed 3 or 4 dogs and sell them to your friends. So at the proper time, I'd like to make a motion.
we have, two, and I guess these are signed up. Tamara, is this 144 that you want to talk on? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
thank you for the.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And we'll call you back. Tamara, I would say your last name, but I'd mess it up.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Feliciano.
Okay.
Not Italian,
Thank you.
ironically. I'm an attorney here in Atlanta, in the Atlanta metro area, and I represent your constituents, consumers who have been defrauded by the retail pet dealing industry. And I cannot, because of legal reasons, give you the amount of those consumers, but what I can tell you is it's enough to fill a class action lawsuit, okay? And what I can tell you in dealing with these consumers and these stores and what's going on behind the scenes is that I have extensive knowledge of the subject matter that we're talking about today, and I can answer any of those questions that you just provided with the accurate answers with the evidence to support them. And I can tell you that this bill does not protect consumers at all. In fact, consumers have more rights without this bill than they do with this bill. And I can also tell you that the goal of achieving protection for pets does not exist in this bill, and you have to forgive me because I didn't bring a copy of the bill up, but I will actually just look at this. Yes, it is true that the retail pet industry is saying that they will only buy from USDA licensed breeders who do not have direct violations. The problem with that is that most violations of the Animal Welfare Act are actually listed not as direct violations. They're things like failure to maintain veterinary care. We're concerned about shots and things like that, but these USDA licensed breeders are violating that, and they're not being cited as direct violations. The majority of USDA violations of the Animal Welfare Act are not direct. Failure to maintain records, excessive fecal buildup in cages, all of those are not listed as direct violations. So what that means is that under this bill, any retail pet store buying from a USDA licensed breeder with anything that's not direct, which can have as many violations of the Animal Welfare Act as they want. And by the way, that's what they're currently doing. There's no difference in this bill. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't change anything for the retail pet industry, which is why they're proposing it. As far as, that is a massive loophole as I see it. As far as consumer protection, there is a provision in this bill that repeals all laws in conflict. So the question really becomes, thank you so much, it repeals all conflicting laws right here in the preamble. So what does that do to the consumer protection laws of Georgia that would otherwise afford consumers remedies? What does that do for contract law remedies? This bill doesn't answer that, and so that's going to flood the courts with questions and about trying to figure out what your intent in drafting this bill was. There were a couple of questions, so I want to address those. As far as local control, that is huge. Okay, it does take away the ability of local counties to make ordinances if they affect the retail pet dealing industry. This is a direct response to over 200 local municipalities throughout the United States creating restrictions on the retail sale of pets in their communities. And when those counties and cities and municipalities make those rules, they do so because they're trying to control things like pet overpopulation and trying to allocate tax dollars resourcefully. And the problem with taking away the county's ability to do that is that now you're taking away the county's ability to control those issues that are pertinent in your county in particular. The state doesn't deal with animal control, the counties and the cities do. So you're taking away their ability to respond to local problems. And Chairman Earhart said that there are 30 pet stores selling dogs and cats. There are not 30 pet stores selling dogs and cats. There are about 15, and the majority of them operate under one corporate name, Petland. And Petland is in Cobb County, and most of my clients are in Cobb County, and most of my clients would be adversely affected by this bill. They will still be able to sue in a court of law, but notably missing from this bill is affording consumers the ability to either take this quote-unquote lemon law, which is what it was referred to, the quote-unquote lemon law provisions, or sue under contract law, or sue under whatever other laws are available to them. That bill doesn't answer that question. That is a huge problem that this room needs to decide if this bill does go forward, at the very least. As far as if I can just go through it piece by piece. Sure. I just wanted you guys to know right now, currently, most pet stores in the state are paying more than the cap that this consumer lawsuit provides, by the way. In order to avoid lawsuits that they know that they're going to lose because they're defrauding consumers in this state, they just pay all veterinary costs and the cost of the dog. So what you're doing is actually adversely affecting the consumer by this lawsuit. This entire bill needs to go or needs to be reworked, but it's creating more problems than it's solving. Absolutely.
No, just, and in general, one of the concerns where I'm from, down in rural South Georgia, is any time a bill comes through regarding pets of any kind, that there's some underlying conspiracy to somehow put additional regulation on pet owners, dogs, cats, mostly dogs down in South Georgia with the hunting and things that we do. But I almost want to agree with you just based on pure free market across the board. You buy a couple of pets from these retailers that turn out to have some of these diseases that you're not vaccinating them, etc. Word begins to spread. Don't buy pets from there. You're no longer in the pet business, and it just kind of takes care of itself. But to just say that there shouldn't be, that this whole thing needs to be thrown out is a little bit of a extreme, I guess, because a lot of time and communication's been invested in trying to make sure that we do it the right way for these commercial establishments that have the brick and mortar. There's got to be some consumer protection.
Right. So I think you need to listen to those consumers. Right now, the only input in this bill that's been added is from the retail pet dealing industry. And what I represent are the consumers' interests. And my concern with script, I think that you could rework it, and I certainly have suggestions on how to do that. But it needs to be reworked because as is, it does not do what you're intending it to do, which is protect consumers, protect the retail industry. It does not do that, and there has been no input. We sat here and I listened to the input that's been put in, and that's all from one side, which is the retailer's side. It's what they perceive the consumer's concerns to be, and they certainly don't know what those concerns are, and there are certainly some massive loopholes in this law that need to be addressed. So when I say scrap it, I say scrap the majority of what you have, and I think that it can be reworked, and I would certainly be willing to help rework that. And in a reasonable amount. I mean, I'm an attorney. I get it. I've come from a small family business. I understand both sides of this argument. I understand that there's a give and take. But this law as it is, this bill as it is a complete take in favor of the retail pet dealing industry. And it could preclude citizens, constituents from seeking adequate remedies available to them at law. I mean, it caps their damages.
Thank you for your testimony and for being here today. You started out by saying that the consumer is better off without this than they are, and that this doesn't really offer. So I have a couple of questions about the bill versus what is in place today in the law. What is required of pet stores today as far as vaccinations for any dog or cat that they might sell?
They're required to give rabies vaccinations, but almost all of the pet stores in the state are vaccinating against things such as the typical vaccinations that your vet requires. They're doing that anyway, and they're doing that so that the animals don't get sick, because it's that circular argument. If the animals are sick, if they're susceptible to those diseases, then they're going to get sick and they're not going to be able to sell them.
So the law today says rabies only. This bill lists 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8 additional to rabies. So there's additional protection than what the consumer has now. Today, the consumer has a certain amount of days to return a pet. How many days do they have today?
Actually, can I go back to the vaccinations, because I don't think that was accurately.
I'm sorry, you said that it was rabies was today. They have rabies today is what they're required by law.
Right.
This bill proposes an additional 8. So the next question I have is, how many days does a consumer have to return a pet under today's law?
I just want to address the vaccinations, because the vaccinations are important. Just because an animal is vaccinated for that disease doesn't mean it doesn't have that disease. All of those animals are receiving vaccinations, and we have pet stores in the state that are selling animals. Just look at the GDOA complaints that you receive against pet stores, and you'll see that there are diseases running rampant in certain pet stores throughout the state. So just because they're vaccinated does not, and those animals have been vaccinated. So just because they're vaccinated doesn't mean that they're protected. And I think that's the most important takeaway that this committee needs to understand. Because
and
you're not
that
achieving your goal.
Today, there's only a requirement for rabies.
Correct.
And this would require an additional. Okay. The next question is, how many days does a pet owner have to return a pet under today's law?
Under today's law, there is no lemon law for pets. However, if you look at the current existing law, one thing is happening. Pet stores are allowing them to return anyway, but under the existing laws, consumers are more protected, because if they return an animal, for example, the animal has a Giardia or a contagious disease, something that's contagious to humans. If the pet store denies them that return right now, the consumer can sue or threaten a lawsuit, and that will allow the consumer some kind of remedy.
Threaten the lawsuit under what law? I mean, what are we giving up when we pass this?
The problem is that pet stores are. This is a much complicated inquiry, but what you're giving up is if you go back to, you can take the entire lemon law, and you could, I'm not necessarily, as far as the lemon law goes, I think it needs to be reworked, but the problem with the lemon law is when you go back to this preamble, it says all laws need to be repealed that are conflicting. So the question becomes, how does the consumer protection statutes of the state of Georgia, as they currently exist, affect this law? What this does is arguably usurps the consumer protection laws afforded to the consumer in the state.
That preamble language is in every single bill that we pass.
I understand,
So,
but you're creating, I understand what you're saying, but you're creating, by virtue of creating this law, you're capping the consumer's damages. So where otherwise, if that consumer can resolve it with the pet store, or they can sue, but you're capping consumer damages.
So this bill spells out how long they would have to return an animal.
Sure, and let me tell you about that 10 days. Actually, that's a great point. Goes back to the vaccination. So 10 days is the incubation period for most contaminable diseases. So what happens is, if a dog comes into the state of Georgia with a disease like Giardia, and it's very highly contagious, or parvovirus, highly contagious, it gets put in a pet store window with 5 or 6 other puppies, and then those puppies sell. a veterinarian's not going to be able to diagnose that disease in 10 days. Most of them, at earliest, it's going to be 14 and 16 days. The clinical symptoms are so similar to things such as kennel cough, which can be, cured a little bit easier. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, this isn't speculative. This isn't attenuated. This is what I'm seeing every day. In the pet stores, veterinarians will tell you that's what's happening. So what happens is you sell a dog that contracted a contagious disease on day 1. 10 days, you might not have a diagnosis of that disease. And in most cases, you don't have a conclusive clinical diagnosis of that disease. So that 10-day looks great, but it doesn't actually do anything.
Yes, sir. If you had one thing, this whole bill, one thing, priority, what would you change first?
Preemption.
Okay, and why?
I think you have to change preemption because it erodes your local businesses that are your local counties and the ability to respond to things that they're seeing happening in their county every day. We are at a state level right now. We are dealing with multiple counties throughout the state of Georgia. Those counties are in the best position to know what's going on in their county and how best to respond. If you take away their ability to respond to things that they need to change, things to solutions that they create as a response to the things that they're seeing in their communities every single day, you're completely undermining their processes in their authority, and it's just devastating to the communities.
So you're saying keep it local control more than the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to get rid of the entire section. I mean, if you're gonna move this forward, I think the entire section, the entire preemption section has to go. I mean, it doesn't do it. It doesn't help at all. You're making, in order to keep it, you're making general assumptions about what's going on throughout the state, and those people in power are there for a reason to respond to things. Like I said, like pet overpopulation. What we've seen throughout the country is that local counties and cities have said, I want that authority. You even have some in Georgia right now that are saying, I want that authority. I want to be able to respond to what's happening in my community. And so keeping that in there, you're saying 20, you're actually giving 17, no more than 17 businesses in this state power over their communities, over their counties. Now their counties can't make any decisions that adversely affect 17 businesses. 17, that's it. Most of them are from one corporation. So now you're giving the county's power to the corporation. County, city, municipality is what.
Just so you know, this is not the first bill we've ever passed. It preempted local government.
I understand. I understand that, but I think in this case it's going to be detrimental.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that's one of the things that I had concerns about initially as I read this bill is the preemption part. And we desire more local control, but when it rolls over into the commerce area, I would be against local government saying our citizens are dying too often of heart disease. We're going to keep red meat sales. I happen to be a beef producer. We're going to keep supermarkets from selling steak. I would certainly be against that, and I don't think that's where local control should be with that. And so I kind of got away. I got okay with the preemption part because it does deal with commerce. But one thing that you mentioned is this legislation would cap consumer damages. Does it cap consumer damages at it? Just in my cursory reading of the bill, it looks like the consumer's made whole. That they get all their money back, including sales tax, and their vet bill. Is that not right?
No.
Okay.
And if I can give you some real world examples of what's actually going on right now. what it does is it says that you get the purchase price back of the dog. The dog in a pet store is going to be thousands of dollars. So what we're seeing happen, I've seen it happen over 500 times. And what we're seeing happen is that you buy a dog, you fall in love with the dog's sick. You take it to the vet. A lot of these sicknesses, illnesses are really bad, and they need emergency veterinary care or long-term veterinary care. So the veterinary care almost in every situation exceeds the purchase price of the dog. So when consumers go to get their money back, what's going to happen is if they paid $4,000 for the dog and they paid $10,000 in medical bills, they're usually somewhere between 7 and 10. $10,000 in medical bills, they're still spending $6,000 between the purchase price of the dog and medical bills. They're not made whole. Now, mind you, that may be acceptable to the consumer, it may not be, but the problem is if it's not, if the consumer tries to seek additional damages, they're capped. They're capped at the purchase price of the dog. Some of these consumers get the dogs on sale, right? So it's an $800 dog, which is a low end. They usually sell between $3,000 and $5,000. But they'll get an $800 dog.
I'm selling the wrong thing.
Retail.
I need to get out of the cattle business.
Oh yeah, these dogs are going in these stores for $3,000 to $5,000. A low-end dog, if it's $800, it's always. I mean, and it's sick, it's going to cost $1,000 in vet bills. So no, you're not making the consumer whole in any way, shape, or form in most cases. And in some cases that might be acceptable to the consumer. But the problem with this is that in most cases it's not, and I know because I represent consumers.
Well, I mean, right now, you don't have the provisions regarding this line number 150 that says the right to retain the animal and receive reimbursement for reasonable non-emergency and emergency vet costs as part of the Lemon Law that the chairman alluded to. So, I mean, you don't have that provision now, but it just appears in my cursory look that the consumer would be made whole. It might, I spent $1,000 on a dog, and I got $2,000 in vet bills. I could be wrong, but it looks like the statute covers that.
It doesn't.
Okay.
It really does not. As far as a lemon law, and to the extent that there's a lemon law in this bill, I think that can be worked if that's something you want to keep, and with input from consumers,
Mm-hmm.
so that you understand that does not make the consumer whole. These consumers go through some serious expenses, and I'm a reasonable person. I mean, at a certain point, you just got to cut losses, but not necessarily at the purchase price of the dog. And it's not necessarily that I disagree with that. I just think the problem is the way that it works with your consumer protection laws is not addressed, and the way that it works with your contract laws is not addressed in this bill. So you have two things that are very noticeably absent from this bill. And so what's going to happen is that the courts are going to be left to try to figure out what you meant if you don't address it. So it's something that needs to be addressed if you want to keep that lemon law aspect of it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm through.
Two more questions, and not a lot of time.
No, just making sure that we're careful not to get that 700 plus caught up in that. And I know we talked about it, and I think you did a great job explaining it, but just in an abundance of caution because of the number of breeders and so forth in other areas, particularly down in my area. Don't want them to get caught up in that, in the mix of all y'all's arguments up here in Metro.
They won't be, as far as I can tell. And the GDOA rules currently, all this is that it exempts the 30 breeders breeding animals or less, so it's not. But they will be, they are unregulated. I think somebody said earlier that those breeders are covered by the USDA. I just want everybody to know that they're not. They operate unregulated, and in some cases that's fine. That's just something that this bill doesn't address or talk about, and I don't think it's something that needs to be discussed right now anyway.
Got a very high nervous state of mind. I'm going to let two lawyers talk.
It's not me, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed here, all this talk about dogs, and as Mr. Toller pointed out, I think last night we saw once again where cats are superior to dogs, didn't we, Brian?
Oh, that's low.
Wow.
For y'all that don't know, he is from Kentucky.
Well.
You know what a little ball game hurt on the radio. Anybody else have any questions for Ms. Cameron? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Y'all, I ain't been around here long, but I always thought that underlying language was new language. And this 65 line of lemon law, this new language is not in law currently. It seems like consumer protection. Deborah Bergen? Yes. Please, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm fine. And first of all, I really do want to thank all of you for taking this issue under consideration, because I do believe that you are trying to do the best that you can to try to protect consumers, and that on first glance of this law, it may appear that it actually is designed to protect consumers who choose to purchase their pets from commercial pet stores. In light of the fact, in respect to your time, I have so many different loopholes I could share with you for those of you that are interested, but in light of your time today, I don't want to get into too much. I want to just ask a few key questions, and I do want to elaborate on the question on the what Tamara was talking about, is that taking away the local control is a great concern, and I'll tell you why. It's so interesting that y'all are having this hearing today on February 1st, which I have a governor's proclamation that today is the beginning of Spay-Neuter Awareness Month in Georgia. And the reason for that is that so many of our counties are dealing with severe overpopulation of pets in their county. And for all emotional issues aside, this is very expensive. Do y'all realize how many millions of dollars our state spends on taking care of, even on the cost of euthanasia of pets, because there are so many? That's not the issue, because there's still going to be people who would prefer to go to a breeder or prefer to go to a pet store, and that is their choice. That is their choice to do that, and that's not what we're opposing. But if a particular county, and let's just take Fulton for an example, spending millions and millions of dollars on control of overpopulation, why would we prevent them from choosing to create ordinances or to create regulations in their own county that help them address this problem? So that's something to consider. Is the problems are handled by the counties and the cities, so why shouldn't they have access to the solutions on their local level? So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to ask about is, who is going to enforce these rules? And if it's going to be our Georgia Department of Ag, do they have the bandwidth to do that? I believe there are currently 17 or 18 inspectors for 159 counties. So is that realistic? I would also just like to mention that of the supporters of this, at least 3 of the 4 groups that you heard supporting it have a financial stake in this. So they have there's a financial stake in selling animals. So, I'm still very curious why an industry would write their own lemon law. Why was that necessary? If there wasn't consumer concerns already, why would this be unnecessary? And there's a lot of other issues, but I know I know y'all have questions, and I also know that you have other bills to discuss today. So I would like to just let you know that if you have other questions, Tamara is an excellent resource. I have some information I'd be happy to share, but would anybody like to ask me questions before I go that I might? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With all the discussion about local control, I'm just curious to know, has there been any discussion with associations like Georgia Municipal Association, GMA, and ACCG regarding any issues or concerns about local control?
To the best of my knowledge, they have not taken a position on this particular bill yet.
Okay, thank you.
That ACCG did come talk to me and did say that they were not taking a position at this time.
Said the same to me, sure.
Anybody else? All right, thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Appreciate you.
Thank y'all so much, seriously, for taking this under advisement.
Does all have anything else you want to add?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, I've taken up enough of your time and the committee's time. I'm appreciative of the hearing, and this committee is certainly wise enough to hear what has been stated.
Okay. All right, I guess we are ready for a motion if there's no other discussion. On that or other. Todd, was I wrong on what I said?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Todd Edwards with ACCG. I have spoke with the author of the bill, and you, Mr. Chairman, like any of these issues, they're often difficult to address, and y'all mentioned that animal controls are often emotional. What we're trying to do is gather information from our counties as to what specific ordinances, and we did have this discussion, if any, this preemption would impact. There are some issues that are best addressed at the state level. However, we do spend a lot of money, as mentioned by Deborah, on animal control, overpopulations, et cetera. Once, and if we get any information on any ordinances impacted by this, I will come to the author, shall this bill progress, and try to work it on those over the time of the legislative process. But right now, I'm just still trying to compile that information. ACCG, you are correct, has not yet taken a position, and we won't do so without very careful study on this issue. So thank you for the opportunity to express that, and hopefully, if should any concerns arise, to continue working with the author and others through the process. That's okay. And again, I'm Todd Edwards with the Association of County Commissioners.
While we are on, y'all, Representative Turner has a simple little bill. It kind of follows up and we'll go ahead, that's you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you House Bill 40, which is a dog bite bill. You might recall this bill if you were on the committee last year. I'll go over it really quickly for those who were not here last year. I had a constituent who had a child that was bitten in the face by a dog, and when they went to have the wound treated, asked for the veterinarian shot record for that dog to see if it had been up to date on its rabies shots. The veterinarian declined because in current state code, the veterinarian is not allowed to share the vet record, the shot record of the animal. And so this bill would allow for the treating physician to make a request for the shot record of the dog in the event of a dog bite. And that's what the bill does. This is the exact same language that was passed out of this committee last year. It got caught up in the legislative process. Hope to get it done this year. We have worked with the Georgia Veterinarian Association folks, and they have no objections to the language that you see.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, sir. This was the same deal we vetted last year. It came like this, you left it like this. Exactly the same.
Something else that the Senate monkeyed with, I think. And just to be clear, this doesn't get into anything except, it doesn't get into any livestock records or horse records or anything like that.
Nothing like that at all.
Okay. Okay.
Move with that.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. All right, thank you. We got one more little simple bill, and I'm going to explain it. I'm not necessarily sure I'm going to do it on the floor. But anyway, it deals with the Department of Agriculture. The federal government has come out with a new Food Safety Modernization Act. that requires inspection of certain farms and certain packing houses. All this does, and the department has to have this language in order for it to take over the inspection services for FDA. It just gives them the permission to do the inspections. That's it in a nutshell. Best thing it does is keeps the federal government off of local farms. So if there's any questions, I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, we on a roll.
Could you make the bill a little shorter?
Well, I don't want to confuse you. But like I said, the best thing it does is keeps the federal government off of local farms. Okay, got a motion to pass. Is that second? Got a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. We got through by rules time. Thank y'all very much for coming. Anybody else got anything? You taking my pulse or something? Is that it? Thank y'all very much. We adjourn.
Good job.